Thank you for tuning in. This is the Daily Report for Thursday, April 7th here in Korea. I'm Min Sun-hee. There's been a slight decline in our daily COVID-19 infections, and I have Kwon So standing by with those tallies. So let's start here in the country then.
Sure, Sunny. The downward trend in daily COVID-19 infections is continuing. So let's take a look at the exact figure that was tallied as of 12 a.m. this Thursday. 224,820 cases were confirmed. And that marks a drop by around 61,000 cases from the day before. And if we compare this figure to exactly a week ago on Thursday, it's a drop by nearly 96,000 infections. Going over to our map, a little over 60,000 new cases in Gyeonggi-do province, less than 40,000 in the capital's whole, and elsewhere there is a mix of 4-digit and 5-digit figures of daily increases in infections. And with that, Korea has an accumulated caseload of 14.7 million, and the death toll stands at 18,381, with 348 additional deaths reported in the past day. And on to the number of patients that remain in severe or critical condition. Not a big change from the day before, just a slight decrease, as you can see. And as for our vaccination figures, roughly 2,200 people have gotten their first COVID-19 dose on the day before, and around 1,600 their second dose or are now considered fully vaccinated, while around 16,000 people have been administered with a booster shot on Wednesday. And now globally, the number of cases is gradually on a decline. We're going to go into the details in a bit, but first the number here, 1.2 million new cases were confirmed in the past day, with a little under 8,000 fatalities. And those are the general updates I have for now, but I'll see you back in a bit. Sunny?
All right, so thank you for those tallies. Now for more local coverage, I have Shin Yeon here in the studio with me. Yeon, welcome back.
Great to be here, Sunny.
Right, so I understand quite a number of infections in recent days are being linked to nursing centres here in the country. How are authorities responding to tackle, that is, this particular threat?
Well, Sunny, it goes without saying that nursing homes are vulnerable, as there are many senior residents there with underlying conditions. 1 out of 3 COVID-19 related deaths in the month of March were reported from these facilities. In response, health authorities have started an outreach program dispatching medical workers to nursing homes nationwide to provide treatment. A total of 45 medical centers have been designated for this task, and they will form 73 separate teams, with each being comprised of at least 1 doctor and 1 nurse. This outreach program will last until the end of this month, but authorities could extend this program if needed.
Right, that's good to know. Yoon, I hear that vaccine uptake among children, meanwhile, remains quite low.
That's right. What's also discouraging is that 1 out of 3 unvaccinated teens in Korea are not interested in getting jabbed at any time in the future. The National Youth Policy Institute conducted a study on some 4,000 teens between the age 9 to 24 last September, and they found out that the younger the respondents were, the more hesitant they were in getting a vaccine. Around half of the children in the survey who were reluctant to get vaccinated were between 9 and 11 years old, and concerns over possible side effects were the leading cause of vaccine hesitancy among children. However, a far more positive attitude towards vaccinations has been witnessed among older children. 80% of those aged 13 and 18 have been double vaxxed, while the rate stood at 88% for teens aged 16 to 18. Most recently, authorities have asked teens aged 5 to 11 who are diabetic, obese, or have weak immunity to get their primary COVID-19 shots. But so far, only 0.7% of those eligible have gotten their first shots.
Yeah, and authorities have also reiterated their intentions to ensure a gradual transition into a new normal, right?
That's right, Sunny. Authorities have made it clear that they won't rush to declare COVID-19 as an endemic disease, nor will they lift all social distancing measures at once. Instead, they will stick to their gradual return to normal approach. Now, this is due to the lingering threat of stealth Omicron, among other risk factors. But authorities also believe, given Omicron's low fatality rate, maintaining our current restrictions will do more harm than been good, especially to small business owners. After our current measures expire in less than 2 weeks, authorities said they would map out a timeline for the lifting of almost all restrictions, but they said this has to happen gradually, one step at a time. Mitigating the impact on people's livelihoods is their top priority, so business curfews and the cap on private gatherings may be among the first measures to be eased. As for mask mandates, well, we might have to wait longer before we can go outside without a mask on. Health authorities have said in the past that masking rules will likely stay in place while other measures are lifted first. They also reminded the public that restrictions could be reimposed if a new threatening variant emerges.
Right, and in the meantime here, and I understand COVID-19 infections worldwide are on a decline.
That's right. That's what we're seeing from the COVID-19 figures reported in the last 2 weeks. The WHO on Wednesday said the number of global infections dropped by 16% on week. The global health body compared figures last week to numbers from the week before. And though South Korea still reported the highest number of new infections for 5 weeks straight, its figure was also 16% lower compared to the previous week.
I see. All right, and thank you for that report. I'll see you back here on Friday.
Thank you so much.
Right, and up next, I have Swa back at the desk with the global coverage of the pandemic. Now, Swa, as Yeon just mentioned, you have more on the assessment by the global health body with regard to the world's COVID-19 infections.
Right, so let me go into some more details on the WHO weekly report on COVID-19 infections around the world. So the 16% on-week decline that Yeon mentioned was between March 28th and April 3rd, and that marks a downward trend for the second consecutive week. It's a little over 9 million cases that have been tallied in the past week, with around 26,000 deaths. And actually, the death rate has also been going down, or I should say the number of deaths, as there's been a decline by 43%. Now, that might seem like a whopping plunge. However, the World Health Organization said that the week before there was actually an artificial spike in deaths.
I see. Now, meanwhile, on a worrying note, so I understand that India is the latest country to confirm the presence of the XE variant.
Right, the XE variant, which is a recombinant of the BA1 and BA2 Omicron strains, has been reported in Mumbai. So according to local media Wednesday, based on genetic testing, genetic sequencing, a 50-year-old woman tested positive for the XE variant. She was fully vaccinated and reportedly showed no severe symptoms. The woman had arrived from South Africa in February. Now, upon arrival, she had tested negative for COVID-19. Now, some health officials, however, disagreed with the results of the latest test, calling for more analyses. A new variant would stir new concerns, though, as India just recently lifted almost all COVID-19 related restrictions, including mandatory mask rules and social distancing. And this is also a concern because the WHO had earlier said that this XE variant might be the most transmissible variant so far.
Right. And staying in Asia, so China reported yet another record high in COVID-19 infections.
Right. For the third straight day, China has reported more than 20,000 new COVID-19 infections. Now, on Wednesday local time, close to 22,300 COVID-19 cases were tallied on mainland, with China's most populous city, Shanghai, accounting for almost 20,000 cases alone. With that, the city hit an all-time high for the 6th straight day. It has launched another massive citywide screening campaign on Wednesday and continues to set up temporary treating facilities.
So I understand Thailand is seeing an influx of tourists after relaxing its travel restrictions, despite the threat of new COVID-19 variants, of course.
Right, Sunny. The tourism hub has lifted its pre-flight PCR testing rule at the beginning of April, and that appears to have helped a lot in embracing a flurry of new international visitors. Now, large crowds of travelers have been seen at Thailand's largest Suvarnabhumi airport since the ease in travel rules, following a devastating decline in visitors during the pandemic and strict restrictions. A more than 60% rise in daily visitors was observed in recent days compared to last month.
In the past week, the number of inbound travelers increased significantly. More than 10,000 international visitors arrive here every day.
While earlier, travelers had to submit a negative PCR test result within 72 hours of departure, now they only have to get tested once they arrive. But as this driver says, travelers are not allowed to have contact with others, and on the first day of their check-in at hotels, they wait for their test results.
My job is to take international visitors to nucleic acid testing sites and then hotels. There has been a significant increase in the number of international visitors. I make 6 or 7 trips a day now.
And the easing in these recent travel restrictions in Thailand also comes as a big Thai holiday is coming up, Songkran, and that will be in April from the 13th to 15th. So that's probably going to also boost the travel industry more than the year before.
Right, that's good to know. Over in Europe, finally, so I understand health authorities there are recommending second booster doses for the elderly.
Right, so following the US FDA's recent approval for second booster shots, Europe now is advising senior citizens to get an additional booster shot of an mRNA vaccine, which would be either Pfizer or Moderna. However, both the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control and European Medicines Agency have approved this second booster to elderly aged 80 and above, saying it is too early to consider using fourth shots on a broader age group. The ECDC and EMA claimed there is no clear evidence in the EU that vaccine protection against severe illness wanes substantially in adults aged 60 to 79, which is why they cannot support an immediate recommendation for younger seniors. So compared to the US, the eligibility in Europe seems to be a little different. More older senior citizens can receive a fourth shot. So we will have to see what kind of decision Korea will also make in the future, because we have been also discussing whether a broader population should receive a fourth shot.
Right, we have. All right, so as always, thank you very much for the coverage. I'll see you on Friday.
My pleasure.
We start our new segment on this Thursday on the local corporate front. Samsung Electronics appears to have beaten the odds yet again, with sales for the first quarter of this year projected to post an all-time high. Our Ji-young reports.
Despite the global supply bottleneck and recent geopolitical risks, Samsung Electronics has logged its highest ever sales for the first quarter. The South Korean tech giant's earnings guidance released on Thursday showed sales from January to March amounted to a record $63 billion, up nearly 18% on-year. Samsung also announced a 50% on-year jump in operating profit at roughly $11 billion. And this is the second largest figure among all first quarters for the firm. The figures for the first quarter beat market expectations. Analysts say the earnings surprise was led by Samsung's new phone, the Galaxy S22 series.
Despite the controversy over the game optimizing service installed on the device, the Galaxy S22 series has sold well in the first quarter. The strong earnings compared to the same period a year before were led by smartphones and semiconductors.
The Galaxy S22 series in February attracted twice as many as pre-orders as the previous series. Also, despite the drop in the price of DRAM chips, the expert said Samsung's semiconductor business has posted relatively solid earnings. The expert added that earnings in the latter half of this year are expected to rise.
One of the most important factors that would impact earnings would be whether semiconductor prices recover. In the second quarter, DRAM prices are expected to be weak, so the earnings would turn out similar as this quarter. But as DRAM prices are forecast to rise after the third quarter, we can expect the earnings to go up in the second half of the year.
Ji-young, Arirang News.
Many of the mundane activities that we take for granted are daunting challenges for the visually impaired. To address this reality, one big company has lent its technology to a small startup to allow for a great service. Our Kim Yeon-sung shows us how.
An AI helper for the blind.
There is the remote. There is the remote.
Blind people often have trouble carrying out day-to-day tasks alone. Reading bills and documents, finding the remote, recognizing people and images can all be a challenge. But the app Sullivan Plus, developed by a startup called Tuata Corporation, helps the sight-impaired through all these inconveniences using AI technology.
30-year-old Kim Yeon-sung is looking expressless.
When we get some change, we can't tell if the money is 1,000 won or 5,000 won. This app helps tell the money apart, and it also tells us where the mail is from.
The app started from an act of goodwill.
One of the developer's friends became blind, so we designed the service to help out with some of the discomforts this person was feeling.
But with SK Telecom coming on board, the app was taken to the next level.
SK Telecom's Nugu voice recognition is incorporated into the app. So now users don't have to touch the screen, they can just call out to the screen. So it's become much more comfortable to use. It is the world's first visual aid service for the blind that uses voice recognition technology.
아리야, 문자 인식 촬영해줘.
Now the app is used by 190,000 users in around 200 countries worldwide. And it's completely free. Sullivan Plus is only one of the many wonders that can be made when big tech is combined with small startups that have big ideas. Late last month, South Korea's three big mobile carriers, SK Telecom, KT, and LGU+, pooled together 40 billion Korean won, or more than $32.8 million for a joint fund to support ESG companies. ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance, and ESG companies are those who are in the business of making the world a better place.
Through this fund, we want to invest in building a sustainable environment, bridging the education gap, and caring for the socially vulnerable.
Since mobile carriers use a lot of power, the companies are trying to find an efficient way to reduce the usage. If there's a tech-based startup that can offer a solution, we're hoping to work with them.
Expectations are high as to how big of a positive impact these giant telecom companies can bring to the world. Kim Yeon-sung, Arirang News.
In other news, the cost of grain imports into the country is expected to climb further in the months ahead, and this reality is already affecting the prices of some popular dishes here. Our Min Soo-kyun explains.
The prices of imported grains in South Korea are expected to keep rising in the second quarter and beyond. According to the Center for Agriculture Outlook under the Korea Rural Economic Institute, imported grains for human consumption are expected to rise by 10.4% from the previous quarter, while grains for animal feed are likely to increase by 13.6%. The projected rise was attributed to several factors. These include the war in Ukraine, which is disrupting harvests and shipments in one of the world's biggest grain-producing countries, along with rising rates for sea freight and a weakening Korean won against the US dollar. With those risks to remain, the Institute says the prices of imported food grains and animal feed grains are both likely to keep rising for 6 straight quarters. This means high prices for products down the line that use grains of both kinds, including even meat, which will push South Korea's already high inflation even higher. Food and beverage manufacturers, restaurants, and farmers will have to pass on these soaring prices to consumers. Already, the sharp rise in wheat prices has led to higher prices for Korean noodle dishes like naengmyeon, jjajangmyeon, and kalguksu. Min Soo-kyun, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, over in the US, the Federal Reserve is poised to adopt aggressive actions to tackle the country's high inflation. Among the actions are those that will render borrowing far more costly for consumers and businesses alike. Our Song Yoo-jin has details.
The U.S. Federal Reserve has hinted at taking a big step towards quantitative tightening, which refers to the central bank reducing its purchase of assets. Minutes from the Fed's March meeting released on Wednesday local time showed participants discussed reducing its balance sheet as well as raising the key interest rate. To start off, policymakers, quote, generally agreed on cutting bond holdings by a maximum $95 billion a month. This includes $60 billion in treasuries and $35 billion in mortgage-backed securities, or MBS. At almost twice the peak rate of the Fed's last balance sheet trim from 2017 to 2019, which amounted to $50 billion, the caps could take effect as early as May and be phased in over 3 months or longer, depending on market conditions. The Fed's bond portfolio ballooned to $8.9 trillion after it purchased massive amounts of bonds and MBS to stave off economic shock triggered by the pandemic. Further interest rate hikes were also addressed during the meeting. According to the minutes, many participants deemed one or more increases of 50 basis points at future meetings as appropriate should inflation become more intense. This comes after the Fed raised its key interest rate to 0.25% in March, the first hike in more than 3 years. The minutes also explain that while the majority of Fed officials preferred a half percentage point hike in March, the decision was deterred due to uncertainties caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The Fed's latest move comes in a bid to tame soaring inflation. The U.S. Consumer Price Index jumped 7.9% in February, a 40-year high. During the same period, the Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index, the Fed's preferred measure of inflation, rose 6.4%, greatly exceeding the target range of 2%. The surge in energy and raw material prices, exacerbated by the war in Ukraine, is adding more concern. 송유진, Arirang News.
Also in the U.S., the Biden administration believes North Korea may further engage in shows of military might this month to mark the birth of its founding father. Our Kim Dami has more.
The U.S. Special Representative for North Korea has warned the regime may launch further provocations, stressing that Washington and its allies need to be prepared. Sung Kim said on Wednesday there could be another missile launch or even a nuclear test on April 15th, the birth anniversary of the regime's founding leader Kim Il-sung. The event is also known in the North as the Day of the Sun. The U.S. envoy noted that cooperation and coordination are crucial when it comes to dealing with the North. Kim also urged the regime to return to talks, saying the U.S. is prepared to discuss any concerns it may have. On the same day, U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman stressed the need to take strong action to show that Washington has a credible deterrence against any attack by North Korea. Speaking at a House Foreign Services Committee hearing on Wednesday, Sherman also pointed out the regime is expected to stage more military activities. She then said North Korea issues made up a large part of Washington's discussions with the U.S.-South Korea policy consultation delegation sent by President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol. While underlining the importance of China's role in North Korean issues, Sherman urged Beijing to cooperate as Washington and its allies will continue to put pressure on China. She further made it clear that nuclear-armed North Korea is not beneficial to China. In the midst of speculation that the North may carry out more military activities, Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby on Wednesday declined to comment on whether the U.S. may consider deploying strategic military assets to Seoul to help prevent further military actions by Pyongyang. Kirby then reiterated that the U.S. is in constant consultation with South Korea to ensure allies have adequate capabilities to counter any aggression from the North. Kim Dami, Arirang News.
It's that time of the week yet again when we touch upon foreign media coverage of events here on the Korean peninsula. As always, Kim Sung-yeon joins me now. Sung-yeon, welcome back.
Great to see you again, Sunny. So today we have international coverage on Korea's strategies against COVID-19. Also reports on the latest comments by the North Korean leader's sister, Kim Yo-jong. A story about South Korea and the Quad security framework. And finally, about the Korean mobile game industry looking into a new market. So let's dive right in. CNN reported about Korea's recent case spikes, elaborating that the surge is not only due to the highly contagious Omicron variant, but a symptom of living with COVID-19. The report explained that nearly half of the world's new cases are from Asia, with Korea and Vietnam at the lead. It cited an expert who said that Korea has a large testing capacity, which could explain why more cases are being found compared to other nations. Meanwhile, CNN highlighted that even with soaring cases in Korea, vaccines are the reason why authorities don't seem too rattled. Moreover, the death toll in Korea remains relatively low. The report added not only does Korea have a high vaccination rate overall, the elderly are especially well protected, which is crucial as they are the most vulnerable to severe illnesses and death.
Yes, they are. Meanwhile, Sung-yeon, what has been the international media response to Kim Yo-jong's latest remarks directed at South Korea?
Yes, Sunny, so quite a few of the major international outlets have looked into her latest comments directed at South Korea, which was softer in tone compared to her previous remarks that harshly criticized the South Korean defense minister's reference to a potential preemptive strike. So a report by Daily NK said that her second statement criticizing South Korea probably was toned down due to criticism from within the reclusive state. Kim Yo-jong again criticized South Korean Defense Minister Seok's comments regarding preemptive strikes just 2 days after issuing an earlier statement, but using much softer words, which the article suggests is a move aimed at soothing an upset North Korean public. An expert was cited as saying that North Koreans seem to be fatigued by the regime's attempts to create a confrontational atmosphere with South Korea. And another source of Daily NK added that many North Koreans had reacted negatively to Kim's previous statement issued on Sunday, especially amid their growing discontent due to North Korea's economic struggles brought on by the pandemic and border closures.
Moving forward, Sung-yeon, I understand some pundits see a place for South Korea within the Quad security framework. Tell us about that.
Yes, Sunny. So I did come across a report by the National Interest titled Why South Korea's Place is in the Quad, which indicates that the Biden administration could benefit from recruiting more Quad members, particularly in order to keep China in check. The report by National Interest talks about how South Korean President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol will be a plus to the Biden administration strategy against China. The paper says with Yoon coming into power, the Biden administration has a great chance to bring operational context to its unclear vision for the Indo-Pacific region and form a united American strategy against China. It further emphasizes that the Biden administration should invite Korea to join the Quad, as Korea's participation will provide a win-win cooperation scenario for all of the Quad nations as well as the region. It also suggests that the war in Ukraine was a wake-up call and that many Asian countries are wary of the possibility that Chinese President Xi Jinping could perhaps ignite similar chaos in its own neighborhood.
And finally, in the gaming industry, Sung-yeon, I understand Korean game developers are now focusing their sights on the Indian market.
Right, Sunny, so it looks like Korean game developers are seeing a bright future in India now, while slowly moving away from the Chinese market. The New Straits Times cited industry officials who said the Indian market is being seen as an alternative to China's, since China has banned most Korean games from entering its market. The focus of Korean game makers in the Indian market is on mobile games, as they've been getting more and more popular with the growing use of smartphones in India, along with the improving network environment. Among Korean companies, Krafton has shown great interest in the Indian market, with more and more people signing up for a mobile version of its first-person shooting game. NCSoft, meanwhile, has also been eyeing the Indian market in search of new opportunities, also making new investments in India to secure future technologies.
I see. All right, Sung-yeon, as always, thank you very much for the coverage.
Thank you for having me.
A South Korean delegation representing President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol is currently in the U.S. to coordinate bilateral interests ahead of the country's presidential inauguration on May 10th. For more, I have Professor Kim Yeon-wook from the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. Professor Kim, it's good to see you again.
Thank you very much.
I also have Professor Im In-jung at Koongju National University joining this session virtually. Professor Im, it's good to see you again.
Thank you.
Professor Kim, we'll start here then. Let's start with a few words on perhaps your thoughts on the purpose of the current visit to the U.S. by the South Korean delegation representing President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol.
I think the foremost important issue is to bolster and restore the U.S.-South Korea alliance. You know, the alliance itself has been transformed into a comprehensive strategic alliance in the year 2008. But ever since then, it didn't really substantially realized. I mean, the comprehensive strategic alliance means that the alliance, which has been focusing on the Korean peninsula, should be enlarged into regional and global level alliance. But it didn't happen because, you know, South Korea had to think about its relationship with China. And also for the for a decade, Trump government did not really care about the alliance itself, and the two countries communized the threat perception really didn't exist. You know, South Korean government was thinking North Korea not as a threat, but more as a partner to negotiate and dialogue, and the United States was thinking that China is more important threat for the alliance to deal with. So I think at this time it's very important that two countries get together to commonize their strategic objectives, to commonize what are their common threats. So kind of commonizing the threat perceptions, all those kind of things are something that we need to reshuffle to restore the alliance.
Right, and hence this particular trip to the U.S. then. Meanwhile, Professor Im, the incoming South Korean administration has pledged a hardline stance against North Korea's displays of defiance. Can we expect President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol's North Korea policy to perhaps be a radical departure from that of President Moon's?
Well, I want to be more cautious with my own wording because, of course, we all know the President Moon's approach was so-called the peace regime building in the Korean peninsula. So the current government has prioritized, emphasized the importance of dialogues and appreciated any chance of starting a negotiations. You know, the incoming government, I don't think they're gonna ignore those kind of importance of the dialogues and the negotiations. But probably two main things can be different between the current government and the new one. Number one is the upcoming new government gonna more emphasize the so-called deterrence capability of South Korea, because as long as North Korea's that nuclear capability has functioned as a huge bargaining chips, South Korea's position has been more like marginalized. So in that sense, the new government will think about very seriously about the importance of the deterrence capability. And second difference, we're going to be probably bottom-up approach. Bottom-up here means rather than a top-down approach done by for example, President Trump, and the South Korean government too. Different from that, the new probably government will respect more like a professional experts, the career diplomats, their voices too. So I think those two things can be pretty different between the current one and the new one.
Right. Now, Professor Kim, Professor Im just mentioned North Korea's nuclear ambitions. And having said that, how might North Korea respond to calls by South Korea and the U.S. for complete, verifiable and irreversible denuclearization?
I think that term is very sensitive to North Korea. Of course, Trump government also called it as, final and fully verified denuclearization, which is very much similar to CVID, but later on when Trump was negotiating with Kim Jong-un, the concept itself changed to complete denuclearization, which is a very vague term. But from experts' point of view, when one country denuclearizes itself, first one they have to deal with is declaring what are the boundaries of nuclear weapons that needs to be denuclearized. So declaration is something we need to deal with. And then as the process of freezing and process of dismantling goes on, inspectors had to go in and check out whether that process has been genuinely done. That is that is what verification is about. So the term verification, though, is very sensitive to North Korea because North Korea thinks that that's the act of violation of its sovereignty. So I'm not sure if North Korea is willing to accept the verification. I don't think so, but South Korean new government calling it as CVID means that its policy towards North Korea is very much principled. The way to denuclearize North Korea should be done by principle very rigorously, which I don't think is very happy for Kim Jong-un.
I see. And Professor Kim, what then are the chances perhaps of an unrelenting confrontation then between North Korea and the US, especially in light of the current geopolitical events?
I think the two countries' relationship seems like pretty much a standoff for a while because, Kim Yo-jong, her response when the defense minister mentioned about the preemptive strike was very much negative. So I think maybe Kim Yo-jong and North Korea is very unhappy about the new government's positions and the North Korea-US dialogue not going very well. But one thing we need to think about is, Kim Yo-jong mentioned about the nuclear state of North Korea and later on talked that, North Korea is not the target to be retaliated target of North Korean military strike. So I think maybe North Korea is also fearful of a very hawkish policy by South Korea and by the United States, and maybe wants some kind of talk and dialogue to be open with the United States. Maybe in this case, it's not a unilateral denuclearization of North Korea, but something that's related to the mutual arms control between the US and North Korea.
Right, and staying with Kim Yo-jong's remarks, Professor Im, how do you explain North Korea's recent rhetoric directed at South Korea through Kim Yo-jong?
Well, it's complicated because, again, Kim Yo-jong's comment used to be very hawkish. Literally, it was too much. But it sounds like they are trying to adjust the level, too. Well, I think it does imply several things. First and foremost, probably, of course, the new government gonna be, of course, more hawkish or more like a hardliner toward the north. But that can be, of course, stimulating the Pyongyang. But at the same time, they need to maintain or kind of stabilize the situations too. So probably they also they don't want to go too far either. I think that's one thing. And if if they go too far, again, certainly the upcoming new government gonna take more hardliner policies. So that can result in unnecessary, how would you say, those escalation of all this kind of verbal or even physical violence or even arms race over the Korean Peninsula. I don't think that's what Pyongyang wants to have either. So, well, those kind of remarks are just remarks, but at the same time, they have been consistently trying to strengthen their delivery capability, which is what we need to be very, very careful too.
Right, and speaking about that, Professor Kim, there is strong belief that North Korea may engage in further acts of provocation this particular month as it celebrates the birth of the country's founder, Kim Il-sung, on April 15th. Do you share this outlook?
Oh, sure. I think, Kim Jong-un, I think, is, ready to go on with military provocations. Maybe April 15th might be possibly the date of another nuclear test. We don't know what it would be. Because North Korea now, in this fierce U.S.-China competition, is on the side of China. In China, North Korea is very well bolstered. We know that after ICBM test, the United Nations Security Council, China was on the side of North Korea. So North Korea knows that, even though it does, some provocations, military provocations, that crosses the red line. North Korea knows that for China, what is more important is North Korea-China relations as U.S. bashes China rather than denuclearization of North Korea. So I think of heightening the military provocations level. I think Kim Jong-un will try to deliver a very strong message to the United States and South Korea that these kinds of military provocations with ICBMs and nuclear weapons is really a substantial threat to the United States. So you need to change your policy towards North Korea. That kinds of clear messages to Biden government will be delivered by Kim Jong-un, I think.
Right. And Professor, as mentioned by Professor Kim earlier on, the incoming Yoon administration has spoken about the importance of, or the need that is to pursue a comprehensive strategic alliance with Washington, one that covers broader economic and security agendas beyond simply North Korea matters. Having said that, what do you envision?
Well, I think we can get some hints from one article written by the President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol himself. He published that article through the Foreign Affairs, and he suggested a kind of new vision for the South Korea's role in the global affair, and he used the term again, global pivotal state. So, South Korea, of course, used to be one of the poorest or weakest countries in the world, but now its economic power, of course, is one of the kind of top 10 richest country in the world. And not only just that kind of economic power, South Korea has a soft power too. And we have many those, how to say, kind of know-hows or skills, professional experience for so-called governance, democratic governance. So I also do think, South Korea's those kind of administrative experience can provide many important lessons or implications for other countries as well. And another thing is, if you see today's those international affair, we cannot separate some issue from another. Again, the military issue is one. It used to be one, and an economic issue was another. But now everything's are pretty much, everything is intertwined. So it's very hard to separate economic issues from the security issue. So having had all these kind of complicated situations, probably South Korea's former approach, which was more like a pragmatic or kind of two-track or multiple-track approach, might not be that valid any longer. So I do think that the new government also recognizes all this, kind of change in the situation. So that is why I think they suggested that kind of concept, again, global pivotal power. State, I'm sorry.
So a shift in strategy is necessary then. Professor Im, the head of Yoon's U.S. delegation, Park Jin, and his deputy, Cho Tae-yong, are considered strong candidates for the post of foreign minister. What can you tell us about their potential foreign policy directions?
Well, both they started their careers as the career diplomats. We all know they are very knowledgeable, not only just knowledgeable, they experienced all those diplomatic affairs and foreign affairs for very long years. So I respect their kind of very rich and deep experience. And, of course, both they are now elected politician, but not only just being a politician, at the same time, again, as I mentioned, they have a very rich knowledges and experiences in the foreign affair. So I think both can be pragmatic too and rational too in the field of those international affair.
I see. And Professor Kim, late last month, North Korea test launched an intercontinental ballistic missile, breaking a self-imposed moratorium following a similar test back in November 2017. What has been shared about North Korea's missile capabilities?
I think the Malcolm Milley, who is the chief of staff in the United States, mentioned that the House Military Committee at the House that it's a very substantial threat to the United States mainland. Already, other missiles have been deployed in North Korea, which can target the Guam. So at this time, if this missile is developed and deployed in North Korea, this will be really a substantial threat to the United States. So I think this will definitely change U.S. posture in this region, and also bolster the trilateral mechanism amongst the U.S., Japan, South Korea in security terms, which I don't think will be something that is happy to China, which I think ultimately be more getting along with the North Korea. So I think North Korea knows all this kind of environmental changes, which also can be another pressure toward China to support North Korea. But we'll see how it goes. But North Korea definitely has a lot of calculations in this kind of game.
I see. Professor Kim, this is an impromptu question, but against this particular backdrop that you've drawn for us, the Yoon administration is seeking the redeployment of U.S. strategic military assets such as nuclear bombers and submarines here in the country. How does this plan look to affect cross-border ties, do you think?
This kind of thing is that Biden government's North Korea policy is now finally gearing towards a deterrence-based and sanction-based management of the Korean Peninsula, because I don't think Biden wants to take too much time and efforts in this Korean Peninsula. Its main target, the only target is China and the Taiwan Strait. It did not involved in the Ukraine war. It moved its boots out of Afghanistan. So I think as far as the North Korea issues, U.S. is just trying to manage North Korea so that it will not harm the U.S.-South Korea alliance. It will not harm the South Korean people and soldiers in the South Korean territory. But what I'm worrying about is that if this kinds of pressures and deterrence by the United States might think Kim Jong-un think differently and wrongly. Calculations of Kim Jong-un might think that, oh, this will be such a big horror for Kim Jong-un, might have to choose something else, some kinds of military provocations that crosses the red line, which can harm the people in South Korea. That's something that I'm worrying about. But I think the U.S. policy position is very clear to manage North Korea so they would not do something stupid.
Right. Professor Im, what are your prospects now with regard to cross-border ties under the Yoon administration, and what do you propose with regard to Seoul-Washington collaboration to ensure perhaps peace and stability here on the Korean Peninsula?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, today's international affairs are very complicating. It's all mixed. And a crisis in Ukraine, again, Russia's invasion to Ukraine, it stimulated many different countries, such as Germany, for example, or like Japan, or even Taiwan. All this, economically speaking, they are all rich and very, very powerful. But they have looked back, how ready they have been for any of those kind of unexpected threat from the external player. So having said that, there are so many volatile situations these days all around the world. So my new government, I hope the new government can be smart enough not to, stimulate or not to trigger unnecessary escalation of violence or arms race. Of course, deterrence capability is very important for our national security, but how to make a good balance between the two different things will be required, I think, for the new government.
Right, and keeping in mind what Professor Im has said, Professor Kim, what is your forecast of inter-Korean ties over the next 5 years, and how can Seoul and Washington work together to perhaps ensure regional security?
Inter-Korean relations, I think the foremost expectation we can have is to manage the relationship so that something bad would not happen. What I'm happy about is that U.S. and South Korea this time is ready to bolster the alliance. Alliance is something that we have to bolster so that we can get a lot of benefits from international community, not only security, not only military, but as Biden government's core of its Indo-Pacific strategy is global supply chain, which can be a very big benefit for a lot of business firms in South Korea. But one thing we have to keep in mind is that this bolstering and strengthening alliance issue would not devastate the South Korea-China relationship. That's something we need to think hard, so that because the U.S.-China competition is now a zero-sum game, bolstering U.S.-South Korea alliance definitely have an impact on the South Korea-China relations. That's something we have to keep in mind.
Right, and if that being said, then what are your prospects on Korea taking a place perhaps in the Quad security framework, as mentioned by my colleague Sung-yeon earlier on?
A Quad is not a security mechanism anymore. I mean, that was the idea during the Trump government. But Biden's Quad idea and what is going on about Quad is just global supply chain issues on a lot of issues like new technologies. And even though South Korea becomes a member of Quad, that doesn't really is a big, matter for China. China is sensitive about the military threats by U.S.-South Korea alliances and other multilateral grouping in this region. But South Korea joining a Quad, which is aiming at cooperation on new technologies and climate change issues, I don't think that is a big deal for China either.
I see. All right, Professor Kim, thank you very much for your insights today. Professor Im, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts as well.
Thank you.
Right, well, that is all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Report. We'll be back with more coverage tomorrow. That is Friday. Join us then.
I am delighted to share this congratulatory message